Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A with Dr. J. Dunn from My Happy Genes. Today we are delving into something that affects millions of people and many go undiagnosed, and that is chronic fatigue syndrome. So if you have chronic fatigue, if you know somebody that has chronic fatigue, listen in, share this video because we're going to get to the root of how to help. And Dr. J, would you start by telling us what exactly is chronic fatigue syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. So the diagnosis, and in fact, it's not even called chronic fatigue syndrome anymore. It's now called myalgic encephalitis,
Wow.
encephalomyelitis, actually, or ME. And it's diagnosed through symptoms. There isn't any like medical test that says, oh, yeah, you have chronic fatigue. But the diagnosis includes severe fatigue, usually lasting around 6 months that does not improve with rest, along with other symptoms like cognitive difficulties or brain fog, muscle pain, and difficulty exercising or exercise intolerance, essentially. So it's often diagnosed out of exclusion. They do lots of blood work and they say, yeah, there's nothing irregular here, but you have those symptoms, therefore
Hmm.
you have chronic fatigue syndrome. And so as somebody who suffered from it for many years, I can speak to the exhaustion and the brain fog and the difficulty just getting through life. It was tough. Mine started as mono infection when I was 16 and then was recurring for many years. And in fact, this is how I got to understanding genetics was I saw a video by a guy named Rich von Kuhneinenberg, and he was studying myalgic encephalitis or chronic fatigue syndrome. And he was looking at the genetic variants that were associated with it. And it just blew my mind because I had never heard that concept before. And as a natural healthcare practitioner, I'd been trying for many years to work on my case of chronic fatigue syndrome, which for me came from the Epstein Barr virus, which is what's responsible for mono. And as a functional medicine practitioner, I was using herbs and things to try to build up my immune system, and it would help temporarily, but it never really cured it or had any lasting effect. The minute I'd stop taking a supplement, boom, there's chronic fatigue syndrome back again. And so when I saw that video, I was just like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Like why it never goes away. I saw other patients that had chronic fatigue syndrome that didn't really respond very well to much of what we were doing. That's when I did a deep dive into understanding genetics. And one of the main genes that I found responsible, and in fact, it's in the literature, the vitamin D receptor, the same one that we've been talking about that helps with brain chemistry, the one that turned on my happiness capacity, is the same one that actually activates the immune system to go after infections. And so for Epstein-Barr virus, it's something we call an implanted virus. It stays in your system and then just recurs and activates, much like herpes does, or yeah, Lyme, same. Even though Lyme isn't a virus, but it acts the same way. It gets
It's in
implanted and
there and yeah, can come back. Yeah.
yeah, and gets reactivated. And so when I started to look at what does the vitamin D receptor do and how does it work? And one of the things it does very effectively is activate the immune system through upregulating T cells, which is our main defense against viruses and other invaders, infections. And if your T cells can't activate, if you can't absorb vitamin D, your T cells can't become mature T cells and fight infections. And so for somebody like me, I had these little wimpy T cells going, hey, cut it out, stop, don't. And then I didn't know this was going to happen, but once I started activating my vitamin D receptor, it was like, bam! It took about 2 weeks, my chronic fatigue syndrome gone. And again, those two things, like my depression gone and my chronic fatigue syndrome gone after. So when I was 16, right, I had this infection. And then 40 years of fighting chronic fatigue syndrome gone within a couple weeks. And I was like, oh man, we're onto something here. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, it sounds like a big deal. And I know that I said at the top of the recording that people go undiagnosed. And when you were describing the symptoms, there are so many things that could cause fatigue and brain fog. So I imagine that it's really hard for you as a practitioner of Western medicine to come up with that and say, this is what it is. So would you say that if people have those symptoms, that chances are it's a virus of one variety or another? Like I know EBV, like you said, I get flares occasionally. I don't know why, but is it that with more vitamin D, they'd be better, but they need to know whether their vitamin D receptor is working, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that was the key. Again, for me, I have that genetic variant where I can't absorb vitamin D. So taking more vitamin D didn't help, and it won't help, and it could be toxic for people with that genetic variant. So they have to be very careful. When you take the cofactors that help vitamin D be absorbed, and that the interesting thing is vitamin D activates so many other enzymes in the body. It's critical for the proper functioning of a lot of things that happen in the body, including we know about bone health, how it helps us absorb other minerals and build bones. Some of the symptoms of a vitamin D receptor variant could be like osteoporosis, osteopenia, those kind of things, but also chronic infections. It's a number one red flag that you probably have a genetic variant there. Your immune system is not really fighting infections well. So you get one infection after another if you get colds and flus and other kinds of infections. And there's another gene also involved here, and it's the nitric oxide synthase. It's the NOS gene variant, and its job is to turn nitric oxide into peroxynitrite and superoxide. And those are directly antiviral, antibacterial, and they can kill Lyme, they can kill spirochetes, they can kill parasites. So if you have genetic variants in that particular gene, then you're not going to be able to fight those kinds of infections too. Back to what you were asking, whether chronic fatigue syndrome is always from a viral or some kind of infection. I would say a good majority of the time, but there's also something that we have to look at, which is mitochondrial function, because you could have mitochondrial damage that can feel very much like chronic fatigue syndrome, where you have very little exercise intolerance and brain fog and low energy and weight gain. And it can feel very much chronic fatigue syndrome. And it probably could be categorized as that or labeled that. It's really a description, right? It's, yep, I'm tired all the time. So yeah,
Chronic
we're going
fatigue.
to,
I know we love a
right.
diagnosis though, because it feels first we've been oriented to look for a diagnosis because once we have a diagnosis, we believe there's going to be a remedy. Unfortunately, in Western medicine, there often isn't a remedy. And not to blame them, but like, how do you remedy all of these different symptoms?
Very true. And if it's a viral infection, they don't have much to offer in that category. They don't have, there aren't a lot of, if you had herpes, you could take acyclovir, but as far as like an Epstein Barr virus, they don't have any way to treat that. And so these people get left on the side of the road when it comes to getting true help. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this. And when you get your genes tested, we can see, oh, look, you've got BDR, you've got the NOS gene variant, and possibly some mitochondrial damage. And we can spot that too through the symptom questionnaire and really recommend what to do about it. And I'm telling you, it changed my life. I can exercise. I have the energy that I want, the energy that I need to live my life. And that's a big deal because there's a lot of people out there struggling just to get through the day and relying on caffeine and Cokes or whatever to make it through their day. So I really feel for them.
Mhm. I was reminded when you just said relying on caffeine and maybe Cokes. I was this past couple of weeks as we had family visiting and two little boys, and I was tired a lot, and I watched my brain like drive me to carbs and sugar. I
Yeah.
needed an extra cup of coffee, but it was just this really this drive. It wasn't like I was looking at the cabinet saying, "Oh, I think I'll have a pretzel." It was like, I need. And for people with chronic fatigue, you never are fully rested either. And you mentioned weight gain with some of the other virus, and a lot of these things all come together when you have the energy, like you said, that you need to get through the day. You lose these debilitating symptoms and drives that your brain needs sugar. It's going to cause you to go get it. So there's a lot of positive stuff that comes from just resolving this issue.
100%. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up because you're absolutely right. Cravings as, weakness And you just expressed it very well that when your brain is tired, I got to have energy. I got to have fuel, something fast to make my brain turn back
Mhm.
on again. It's a very powerful drive to get a fast sugar or carbohydrate or to survive. Your brain thinks it's going to die because it's run out of fuel, essentially. So
Mhm.
that drive is so powerful and can make us go to the 7-Eleven and get a carton of ice cream.
A Slurpee. I haven't had
Slurpee.
Slurpee in I don't know how many years. Do they still make Slurpees? They probably do.
Oh, no, I haven't
What do I know?
been there. I don't know.
Anyway, I think we've explained this and given some people hope who are listening who felt like this is just going to be me for the rest of my life. Don't despair of that being your situation. Head over to my happygenes.com and learn more about our program and the testing and reports. And if it seems like the right fit for you, you can grab a kit right there on the homepage.
Love it. Thank you, Gregory. It's funny because we have another Greg on the team, so we ended up having to call her GC.
Which I like. I've always liked nicknames. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. J.
Thanks, GC. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.